Zeus, the king of the gods, the ruler of Mount Olympus, the most powerful being in the entire Greek pantheon, capable of leveling mountains with a single thunderbolt, of deciding the fate of gods and mortals alike with a single word. And yet, for his entire reign, Zeus lived with a fear that never left him, a fear that haunted every decision, every relationship, every act of power. Because Zeus knew something that very few rulers in any mythology have ever had to face. He knew exactly how kings like him are usually overthrown, because he had done it himself. In this video, we're going to look at the complete story of Zeus, not the simplified cartoon version most people know, but the full, complicated, often uncomfortable mythology behind the king of the gods. His rise to power. His many betrayals, both committed and feared. His transformations, his children, his rivals, and the question that defined his entire reign: how do you rule forever when you know better than anyone that no throne lasts forever? As we covered in our video on the Titans, Zeus did not inherit his throne. He seized it through a 10-year war against his own father, Cronus, and the entire generation of Titans who had ruled the universe before him. He freed his siblings from inside his father's body, allied with monstrous beings other gods had imprisoned, and ultimately cast the old order into the depths of Tartarus. Zeus's reign began, fundamentally, as an act of revolution. This is the detail most retellings of Zeus's story skip entirely. He did not simply inherit divine authority. He took it by force from his own father, who had himself taken it by force from his father before that. By the time Zeus sat on the throne of Olympus, he understood the pattern with absolute clarity, because he was both its product and its latest perpetrator. Power in this world did not pass down peacefully. It was seized, generation after generation, by whoever was strong enough and clever enough to take it. And so Zeus began his reign, already carrying the central anxiety that would define his entire rule. If he had overthrown his father, what would stop one of his own children from eventually overthrowing him? This was not paranoia without basis. It was, in the logic of this mythology, simply how things had always worked. The question was never whether the threat was real. The question was what Zeus would do about it. Zeus's first wife was Metis, the Titaness of wisdom and deep thought, the very goddess who had helped him defeat Cronus in the first place. She became pregnant, and a prophecy emerged, delivered, according to some accounts, by Gaia and Uranus themselves, that Metis would bear 2 children. First, a daughter as wise and powerful as her father, and then a son who would surpass Zeus entirely and overthrow him, just as Zeus had overthrown Cronus, and Cronus had overthrown Uranus. Zeus faced the exact same crossroads his father had faced, and he made, disturbingly, almost the exact same choice, but with a method even more extreme. Rather than simply imprisoning the threat, as Cronus had swallowed his children, Zeus swallowed Metis herself, while she was still pregnant, completely, absorbing the goddess of wisdom into his own body, eliminating both her and the prophesied son before either could ever be born. Here is the deepest irony of the story. Zeus, who had risen to power specifically by ending Cronus's tyranny, by refusing to be swallowed, by fighting back against exactly this kind of preemptive cruelty, became, the moment his own power was threatened, the very thing he had destroyed. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself it was wisdom, not fear. But the act itself was identical to his father's and his grandfather's before that. But Metis did not simply disappear. According to the myths, she survived inside Zeus and continued her work as a goddess of wisdom and craft from within him, forging, in secret, a complete suit of armor for the daughter she had still managed to carry to term. After what is described as an agonizing, splitting headache, Zeus called for the god Hephaestus, who split his father's skull open with an axe. And from the wound emerged Athena, fully grown, fully armored, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, born not from a mother's womb, but directly from the mind of the king of the gods. The prophecy had partially come true after all. The daughter, as wise and powerful as her father, had been born, exactly as foretold, despite everything Zeus had done to prevent it. Athena would go on to become one of the most respected and powerful of all the Olympian gods, and notably, one of Zeus's most loyal and trusted children. The son who might have overthrown him, however, was never born. The prophecy in this telling had been only half prevented, and Zeus would spend the rest of his reign never entirely certain whether he had actually escaped his fate or merely postponed it. Zeus is, famously, the god most associated in Greek mythology with transformation, pursuit, and romantic and often deeply troubling entanglements with both goddesses and mortal women. He appeared as a swan to Leda, as a bull to Europa, as a shower of gold to Danae, as a cloud to Io. Each transformation produced offspring who would become some of the most significant figures in Greek mythology and history. Helen of Troy, the Minoan dynasty of Crete, Perseus, and many others. It's worth pausing here to understand why these stories exist at all in ancient Greek culture. Many ancient Greek cities, royal families, and even entire peoples traced their origins back to a divine ancestor, and claiming descent from Zeus himself was the ultimate source of legitimacy and prestige. These myths functioned, in part, as origin stories for real historical dynasties and city-states, retroactively connecting human rulers to divine authority. Modern readers often, and rightly, note the deeply troubling power dynamics embedded in many of these stories, and ancient audiences were not entirely unaware of this tension either, as reflected in the suffering of figures like Io and Europa within the myths themselves. These relationships also created one of the defining tensions of Zeus's entire reign. His wife, Hera, goddess of marriage and family, whose fury at her husband's countless affairs became one of the most consistent forces in Greek mythology, often directing her anger not at Zeus himself, who remained largely unpunished, but at the women and children involved, an injustice the ancient myths themselves frequently acknowledge. Despite his immense power, Zeus's mythology is remarkably full of moments of vulnerability, near overthrow, and constant vigilance. At one point, the other Olympians, Hera, Poseidon, and others conspired together and actually succeeded in binding Zeus while he slept, nearly overthrowing him entirely, before the sea nymph Thetis intervened and summoned the giant Aegeon to free him. Even the king of the gods, at the height of his power, was not safe from rebellion within his own court. This is, perhaps, the most human dimension of Zeus's entire mythology. He sits atop an entire pantheon, wields the most feared weapon in existence, and is worshipped across an entire civilization, and yet he never stops looking over his shoulder. He consumed his own wife to prevent a prophecy. He fathered countless children while remaining wary of nearly all of them. He ruled not from a place of settled confidence, but from a permanent, low-grade vigilance that never fully left him, because he understood, better than any other figure in the mythology, exactly how thrones like his actually end. Greek mythology rarely presents its gods as simply good or evil, and Zeus is perhaps the clearest example of this complexity. He is, simultaneously, the heroic liberator who ended the tyranny of the Titans, the just arbiter who maintains cosmic order, the loving father of Athena and many others, and the deeply flawed, fearful, and at times cruel figure whose own insecurities caused real harm to those around him. Ancient Greek audiences did not necessarily see this as contradiction. They saw it, perhaps, as simply what power does to anyone who holds it long enough. Zeus ruled Olympus for ages beyond counting. But if his mythology teaches us anything, it's that even the most powerful throne in existence was never as secure as it appeared from the outside. Every act of power was shadowed by the memory of how he had gained that power in the first place. Every relationship carried the weight of a prophecy he could never fully outrun. Perhaps that is the most enduring lesson embedded in the story of the King of the Gods. That power taken by force always carries within it the fear of being taken the same way. If this video gave you a deeper understanding of one of mythology's most complex figures, subscribe to Myth and Scripture. Every week, we explore the greatest stories of the Bible, Greek, and Roman mythology, and the ancient world, looking beyond the simplified versions most of us grew up with, into the full complexity of the stories that shaped human civilization.